Well, good evening one and all, and welcome. My understanding and background to Commonwealth Study Conference is that these are very special things that attract very interesting people. I don't think anything's really changed in the last 50 years. At this point in time, my job is to basically talk to you about what Commonwealth Study Conference was in the past and where it is perhaps now. And that's my limited viewpoint. There are others who perhaps know a whole lot more. But suffice to say, 1956, post-World War II, Prince Philip decided to launch a group of interesting people to think about the problems that were facing the world. And a particular forum, a conference, was held at Oxford University as the inaugural conference. And that attracted people from throughout the world, but particularly the Commonwealth nations. And over a period of time, they basically had conferences every 4 years, and those conferences circulated around major cities of the world. Ones that spring to mind in terms of Canada and also Australia, but we were fortunate enough, I suppose, to be involved in the later years, and it's changed a lot in the later years. It was very much a formula of study teams get together from around the world and go out to different places, collect their information, and then bring it back, and they have a show and tell. And in the space of 2 weeks, because that's how long they lasted, they were residential in nature. You moved around, you stayed at hotels, you got to meet some very interesting people along the way. But each of the study tours were quite unique in their own character, and they all brought back different things. You were then pretty much put under the acid on the last 2 days to make a presentation proposal, and that proposal for those people was Prince Philip, but for our generation, the later years, was Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, and she's just as inquiring as her father. Anyway, in the most recent years, for my particular experience, for example, I was a member of 2003, and ours was based in Australia. We started in Melbourne, finished up in Sydney, and I was part of the Sydney study group. There were study groups that went to New Zealand as well, and they all came back together. It was a fabulous experience, and I thank very much Ron as part of that equation. 2007, I was an alumni, and I popped over to New Delhi as part of business as well, but that was good. The 2007 conference is the last official Commonwealth Study Conference that's taken place. There was some discussion about a 2011 conference, but what has evolved is emerging Pacific leaders within Australia, and unfortunately that kind of leaves Western Australia a little bit in the darkness. Anyway, Ron's been particularly vocal and innovative in terms of where he might want to see things going in the future, and he brings us along every now and again to talk to people just like yourselves. Unrelated to the actual conference events, in 2006 was the 50th anniversary, so all the alumni from Australia and around the world were invited to Buckingham Palace, and we had a lovely little trip over there and had a lot of discussions. But that was quite a major event in terms of the Commonwealth Study Conference at that time. And then also in 2011, the Prince and Her Majesty were touring Australia, and so we actually had a gathering of all the CSCs in Canberra, and there was a particularly memorable evening and a dinner at the Australian National University. All I can say to you is if you get engaged in this program, you will meet some extraordinary people. It strikes me that you people are very lucky. You're sitting back there wondering what this is all about, and my observation would be that in life you get offered opportunities, and they pop up every now and again, and this is one of them. And like my colleagues, I enjoyed the benefit of Commonwealth Study Conference 2003, but it was very Australian, it was very Oceania. And one of the best and most interesting aspects, I thought, of the 2003 conference, and my study group was Sydney, okay, so we just stayed around Sydney, Greater Sydney, because we went out to Lithgow, and it was the interaction with people from elsewhere in the world, and like their observations about our society, and then the discussions we had with them about their society too, because it was all brought to the table. And like Ron said, you know, question 1, question 2, you get to question 3, and you might start to get to the truth. Anyway, just to give you a little bit of background about Sydney, we went to Sydney, the Opera House, and had a look at things there. And then also, at the time, emergency service was doing some great things. And so we dropped into New South Wales Ambulance and had a look at their fleet management. And believe me, they have a huge fleet management situation. We dropped out to University of Western Sydney and went through the new university that was servicing the western back blocks of Sydney. And popped over the ranges, and believe it or not, they took all of us down a very, very dark coal mine, which is going to close in the next couple of years, Mount Piper. And I said at the time I thought they were facing a challenge for the future, which has proven true. But yeah, I think the most interesting part about the whole conference was where it was brought back to the acid at the end, and you really were in a competition with your own delegates that were in your study group, because that element existed. And my study group was really quite interesting. We had heads of unions and basically heads of corporations, people from like Singapore who basically project manage secretaries for all the top companies of Singapore. And you know, there were broad spectrums, there were narrow spectrums, and that came from around the world. There was one guy who was a trader who basically came from a small island off the American coast, which happens to be a British sort of like protected from a long way back. But he brought some fascinating conversations to global trade issues. The African guys were extraordinary. You know, this is a different era of African politics, and the kind of things they bring to the discussion about how Africa works compared to Australia or New Zealand or anywhere else in the world is really quite interesting. Yeah. From my point of view, for me personally, I've always been a city planner as opposed to financial planner. I always make that distinction. And I like big picture strategic planning. So when I walked into the interview here in West Perth at the time, I remember Ron asking a question and basically said, what qualities do you bring to the conference, or what do you see as you know, the qualities necessary to take on the conference? And I answered in 3 words. I said vision, leadership and decision making. That's it. That's stopped the conversation there. So I think I just said, what? Okay. I said, no, that's it. It's just those 3 things. Yeah, I made it. I mean, obviously, an esteemed group of I don't know how many interviews they did, but make the most of that opportunity and come right to the point. Don't muck about in terms of answering your questions. It is about you. But it's also about others, and so you know, the family observations that Vanessa made are really very, very true. As Dermot, you know, I mean, like basically there are people around you that occupy the same space, so you've got to give over time. But in the same token, you know, you step out of your own box and challenge yourself. Really go for it. Since the 2003 conference, I can remember going to Canberra and shaking the Prince's hand. And he basically said, what did you do? And I said, oh, I kind of wrote the Anzac plan for Albany. And he goes, oh, what's that about? And I said, oh, well, you know, you got World War I commemorations coming up. And he said, oh, yeah, we're doing a little bit of work about that too. And I said, yeah, I understand you are. Anyway, small worlds collide in big ways. And so basically we had a huge result there. But from my point of view, relative to my industry group, I like to challenge regions to step outside of boxes, which is not an easy thing to do, I can assure you. Albany has been fighting like crazy for the last 20 years to prevent change. That's the nature of the beast. But sometimes you get good ones, and other times you basically get extraordinary people that go way, way too far. Perhaps that's the Pilbara, for example, and the exercise there about the last 10-year boom. I agree with Dermot. If you haven't been sacked once in life, you're missing out on something. Okay, I got sacked a long time ago, and it was for no other reason than it was the general downturn in the market. I came back to Perth from the eastern states, hit the doldrums. I think it was 89 or 88, something like that. But basically, until somebody says, you know, what's your skill set and how does it max our organisation, then you start to question just exactly what you are learning as you go along. And it's more than just a university degree. This will teach you heaps if you take it in, take the opportunity. And it's an extraordinary opportunity. To follow on from a few observations made, you know, I really hope you get a benefit sometime. Ron was very gracious to ask me to nominate for chairman of Commonwealth Study Conference in Australia. Now, Donald MacDonald got the job, and I understood the logic of that, but he's fighting bushfires in certain sectors over in the eastern states, and it's very much eastern states driven. The point is, where does Commonwealth Study Conference go in the future as far as Western Australia is concerned? And there's an enormous Indian rim, and when the Commonwealth came here a couple of years ago, we could see the connections. People started to fathom it, and you get certain mining conferences that take place either in Africa or basically Western Australia, minerals and petroleum. There are extraordinary groups of people that will get together and discuss things, and they do look at bigger pictures. That's part of the nature of the beast. And wherever that exists, then basically there are new people coming along to replace older people. So we have to explore what talent is emerging, as it were, and meeting them is an excellent way of doing that. What else can I add? My experience. I attended the Indian Commonwealth Study Conference, the last one, and I was audacious enough, I suppose, to address the Australians because they sat in a group, and I told them I didn't think their presentation was as good as ours back in Australia when we did it. They got upset about that, and I said, oh, well, there you go. You got to do these things, there's no point in buggerising about with people. You tell them the way you think it is, if you can't trust a person to speak the truth of their mind, nothing they say is really worth listening to. That's my own personal saying. What are you going to do? That's the question you've got to ask yourself. Give it your best shot. I don't know whether everybody here is going to make it on the trip or not, but give it your best shot. And with that, I think that's enough.
You're going to moderate us?
Oh, yeah. Questions and answers. Are we straight into it?
Yes. Yeah.
What do you want to do with this?
Questions.
I'll pass it to the person who's going to ask it. Yep. Do we have any questions from the floor?
I noticed Prime Ministers and other luminaries on the list of people who've gone to the conference.
Yep.
What hope do we have of...
I don't know. Do you want to be Prime Minister?
So at what stage in their life did they get the opportunity to go to the conference?
Mid-career. Basically, you're usually senior management without being top management, because top management wants to know what you can go away and learn.
Can I answer that?
So the year before I went on the Commonwealth Study Conference, I was lucky enough to go to the World Summit in Joburg for Alcoa. And that was supposed to be a young leaders forum of people who were early in their careers between 25 and 35. And I was 40. And Alcoa insisted that I went. So I was the grandma of the team. But I don't think it actually matters what age you are, and whether you're the youngest in the team or the oldest in the team. What matters is how you come to the table, your mindset as you approach the table.
I had a little bit more in terms of experience there too. Our group leader was the CEO of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, right? And so, like most of the team group, we were on the same par. He just happened to be the team leader. So, as far as getting involved in Commonwealth Study Conference is concerned, you could either be involved as a group member, as a team member, or as you could be a group leader. And it's quite a different experience. But I think you had to be a group member before you could be invited to be green. But you didn't. You went straight to it.
No, I went straight to team leader.
Yeah. There you go. Dropped in the deep end. Yeah.
I was just looking for good people.
They're an interesting bunch of people to try and manage, I can assure you.
Just adding a little bit, Neil, one of the briefing we got when we were, I think I've been on two panels, 2 years in selection panels. I think the briefing we got was very specific. We had to look at those people and visualise, would they be outstanding leaders within 10 years of that very moment? And that really crystallised our thinking straight away. You know, you would pick some people as, no, they've reached the pinnacle of their leadership, they won't go any further, so they're out straight away. People that were just emerging, within 10 years they had to be there, so that was pretty good. And it was nothing to do with the fact that Vanessa had the best looking ankles of the lot. Nothing at all. Nothing. So, but that was the main thing. We had pages and pages of stuff to fill in, but it was that leadership thing and their ability to speak for themselves. Again, that individuality thing. If they just said, I'm here representing the Shops and Allied Union or representing, if they were there to represent somebody, they were out of it. They didn't make it. You know.
Any more questions?
Specific.
I was wondering if
Would you like to say your name?
my name's Kyle Williams, here from Murdoch University. I was just wondering if Ron and potentially some other members of the panel could expand on the comment about the people being on the pinnacle of their leadership, or whether they still had more potential, as to how you would identify the difference between someone who is at that pinnacle of their leadership, at people who won't go further, and the people who still have so much further to go.
Very good question.
Anyone want to? German, you want to have a crack at that one?
You go for
After you. You go, Ron.
Well, we've all, in this room, we've all met people who have passed an exam and they reckon that's the pinnacle. They've made it. They've passed an exam. And I'd live in despair because you're nowhere. It's all that, it gives you a ticket to go in life's lottery. You're at the starting point.
Right. Very good question. I think it's a tough one, but as I said, I've had 20 years with CRA, and 10 years of that I was a chief geologist and probably the youngest general manager in CRA group. And we had a graduate recruitment program where we sent a very senior geologist around to every university in Australia, and he interviewed over 250 young people who were going to graduate from university. He got down to a short list of about 25, and those 25 people came to Sydney and Melbourne, and they had 1 hour to convince us that they were the people we wanted to hire. We only needed 8 people. It was a very competitive situation. And in doing that over many, many years, you actually come to be a very good judge of character. And it's all about character and passion. And, at the end of the day, people have to make a judgment. But it's remarkable that now with my career at 40 years, I come across people who I recruited, or I was on their interview panel 20 years ago, and they're now running exploration for Harmony or Newmont or what have you. It's a very satisfying experience that we were trying to pick people who hadn't reached the pinnacle of their career when they were new graduates, and many are called and few are chosen. But at the end of the day, it comes down to your personal experiences and your judgment of character, and it's all about character. Vanessa?
Let me give you a different perspective. I don't think leadership has a pinnacle, because you can demonstrate leadership when you're 6 years old, when you're 60, or when you're 160. Really? Leadership to me is, how do you define it? What was the gem that Ron was looking for in the interview process? I think it's about people who live their values really obviously in the decisions they make, who are courageous enough to live by their own values and call it when they see something that is inconsistent with that. So to me, looking for leaders is not necessarily thinking that there's an end point to leadership. I don't think there is a pinnacle. I think you can demonstrate it all the way through life. And it's really more about what's in here and how you live by that.
All good answers. I'll add a couple. I mentioned 3 words: vision, leadership and decision making. It doesn't matter how old you are, right? Do you really have a vision, and can you enunciate that? Can you sell it? Can you do something, And then you need to identify, okay, I've got a vision. What does it take to actually put it into place? Gather the people around you. work the networks, do the collaboration. But ultimately, it's the decisions you make as you go along in life that'll define what you can and cannot do. Don't be afraid to fail. Simple as that.
Fail fast.
Yeah, fail early and fail fast if you like. And learn from it, most importantly. If you're going to fail, just learn from it. But, you know, there's always something else beyond that. Pick yourself up. Any more questions? If we're struggling for questions, I'll put one last little advert in. Not everybody here is on Facebook, but I dare say most of you as young people are. And I started, and it's operating a Commonwealth Study Conference of Australia Facebook site, and you're all welcome to make an application to join it. Doesn't just tell me you want to join it. We're interested in interesting people, simple as that. But you'll also get to see what we find interesting in the world, okay? We get very interesting speeches from time to time which we put there which challenge people, and also pretty much anything that comes up from a local perspective about the royal family, which is acceptable to put up. But, you know, we're clearly in a very significant change period now for a whole bunch of reasons. And it will be very interesting to see how the world comes to grips with, you know, the next 10 years. And you'd have to say that the Commonwealth Study Conference is uniquely positioned to address and manage our way through that process. And there are those connections out there. We all have those connections around the world.